Hi, I'm Phyllis from the Doll Corner, and I've been working on a little dress for a 1-year-old, and I thought maybe I'd just show you what I've been doing with it. Uh, First of all, it's a very basic little pattern. It has a back yoke and a front yoke and a puffy sleeve and a gathered skirt. And you can change it so much that it doesn't really look like the same dress. You can make it several times and people wouldn't notice that maybe you used the same pattern. Anyway, I cut the front. I cut a piece of lining and a front piece, and then I cut a yoke pattern. And how I made the yoke was I decided I wanted a little round yoke here. I could have made it a V yoke or several different ways, but I decided I just drew a line along, sort of a curved line, and take it, I'll show you, set my pattern on just like this, and then cut along this line. If I'd have wanted it a square yoke type thing, I could have done it this way too. Just however I wanted to, whatever I wanted. So this gave me this little piece like this. And I'll show you how I started. See how it fits the neck and the shoulders and down around the sleeves here. Then I took a little piece of ribbon. I could have taken put one piece of ribbon up, but being this is sort of made a little cut it off here, and anyway I chose to use just a little piece of ribbon, and I sewed it down here to sew my buttons on it. Then I took my lace, and I lined it up along the edge and stitched it right along the edge there, and then folded that over. This would have been folded over like this. So like this. And then I took and just stitched along the edge of the fabric there, and that's holding it onto my dress fabric. Now I'm cutting away. I'll cut this all off, but I wanted to leave it so you could see. If I left the fabric underneath it, you can see where it would be sort of a yellow, and this way it's nice and white. And I sew it together at my sleeves, turn it right sides together, of course, and sew the seams, shoulder seams, and then I sew around the neckline. I have to clip it and press it so it'll be nice and smooth neckline. And then for the sleeves, they're a little puffy sleeve. So what I did was I took a piece of lace with the right side of the lace on the right side of the, well, they're both facing the right way. Gathered along here, and a gathering stitch for the top of the sleeve as well. So then when I center it, the binding, I turned the binding in and just give it a sew down with the machine. I could have just pressed it and went along with it that way, but I chose to just stitch it down. And then I pull my gathering threads in. This is the center of the binding and out here, and then I adjust my gathers to fit, and then sew it all across. So then that gives me something that looks like this. And I've turned this binding in, and I just stitched in the ditch right along here. So that, now you could, if you wanted to, just sew this by hand, but I didn't go all the way to the edge because I wanted to leave this open so that I could sew it when I sew my sleeve together. The binding will cover the seam. And I like to sew it flat when I put my sleeve on. Mixed up here. Let's see. Tuck that out of the way. With right sides together, I match up the center of my sleeve to the center of the shoulder, and then put a pin in at this little mark here and one down here, and then pin it here, and just sew around, adjusting my gathers as I go. So that's basically how I'm working on the bodice. And then my skirt, I really don't have a pattern for it, but usually for a gathered skirt I go 2 to 3 times the hip measurement. And for a little girl, I'm thinking with a diaper on, it probably would be 18 to 20 inches. My fabric was 58 inches wide, so I just cut 58 inches wide. And then by 12 inches. And so I lose 5/8 of an inch for a seam allowance at the waist. And I put about an inch hem on the bottom. And I put a little bit of lace. So that gives me a skirt length of about 10.5 inches with this little piece of lace below. And then I made a ruffle, and the ruffle, I cut 3 pieces 2 inches wide, but 2 would have done, but I cut 3. I always like to make sure I have enough. So I cut 3. And how I joined the 2 together is I put my right sides together and cross them, leaving a little 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, a little bit there, and a little bit here. Then I start my sewing. I sew right from this corner to that corner. You can draw a line if you wish, or you can press it, and then when that folds back, you got a nice bias seam, and it doesn't, you go like this, you have more bulk, but this kind of almost disappears with your ruffles. As you can see where I've hemmed, and then I hem it. And how I hemmed this was I took and just turned it in 1/8 of an inch or less, and then went over it with a cover stitch. And what I mean by a cover stitch, it takes a couple stitches and then it zags out and take a couple more and zags out. And I think it makes a nice, neat, not a heavy looking seam. I did that top and bottom. So then I needed to ruffle it. So I got my ruffler foot out, went on my machine, and I increased my stitch length to 5, and surprisingly enough, it came out that almost 2 to 1, and it was very easily done. I made more because I wasn't sure. I never really know how it's going to gather up. The different fabrics will gather differently, but this worked really well with this lightweight fabric. And then I just stitched it on. And when I got that on, I made lining for this because it is a light flimsy fabric and it gives it a little more body. And I made this one 10 inches and then I put a 2-inch ruffle on it. With a little lace on it. I sewed it like this, just so I can sew it along here, and then turned it over and top stitched it right along here. So that gave me a nice little ruffle. And it came out just about the right length for a lining. And then when I sewed the bodice on, I try to go through between those 2 lines. I guess I didn't tell you how I attached this by putting my 2 gathering rows on. When I do my when I put my get ahead of myself here. When I sew my first gathering row, I put my needle to the left. And then when I do the second one, I leave my foot feet in the same spot, only I move my needle over to 2.5 or 6. I'm not 6, 3. 2.5 or 3. Just depends on how you think you'd like it, but somewhere in there. And then I can sew down the middle of this when I gather it in. Now I've gathered it a bit at this side, and you can see how neat those gathers are by using the 2 rows of stitching. I know it takes a little bit longer, but it gives you a much nicer area of gathers. So I'll be back and I'll show you when I get a little bit further on, show you how. But if you would like to see more on how I trim my bodices and how to make a dress, if you go to my channels that I have, my YouTube channels, you will find one on how to trim a bodice and how to make a dress, and I'll put the link below. So subscribe to my channel so you'll know when so you'll see how I finish up this dress, and follow me on Instagram. If you have any questions, email me at dollfashion77@gmail.com. And thank you so much for watching. Bye now.